Aloha and welcome. Thank you for joining our second Hawaii Economic Association online webinar. My name is Lesley Harvey of the Hawaii Business Consultancy and Board President of the Hawaii Economic Association. Thank you for joining us today. We had an overwhelmingly positive response and we welcome past attendees and new attendees alike. A special thank you to those who donated to our student fund. Your donation will support HEA's scholarship fund, student workers, and student attendance and access to HEA events, among other student initiatives, ensuring our events remain accessible to the next generation of bright minds. Thank you also to those who contributed to our general donation fund. Your generous contribution allows us to continue to provide these events without operating at a loss. Like all of you, we are still adapting to this new climate, navigating delivery of our usual monthly luncheons online. We welcome your feedback and letting us know how we did through a short feedback form that you'll receive after today's event. If you registered, you will receive the link by email. You will also receive the slides and a recording of the event. If you haven't yet registered, please do so at heajune2020.eventbrite.com. In any event, we're glad to be delivering economic education, information, and resources. This month's topic couldn't be more timely given progress on the horizon in opening back up our local economy. Next month, I hope that you'll consider joining us on July 2nd when we hear from Dr. Mark Muguishi, MD, President and CEO of HMSA. This event will also be a webinar, details to follow. We anticipate today's event to be 1 hour, with the majority of that time dedicated to Q&A. Please write your questions at any time using the chat function. The button to open the chat window can be found at the bottom of your screen. Because we have so many joining us today, we're going to keep all other mics muted and videos off throughout. This should ensure few distractions. If you encounter any technical difficulties, please send a private chat to Sierra Brewer, who may be able to help troubleshoot. And should we have any technical difficulties along the way, please bear with us. There are a lot of people on the webinar today. Alan M. Oshima was appointed by Governor Ige on April 8th, 2020 to serve as Hawaii's Economic and Community Navigator. Selected for his experience, business acumen, and long-standing reputation and dedication to leadership and volunteerism, Alan is helping to guide Hawaii through the process of stability, recovery, and resilience following the impacts caused by COVID-19. As an executive on loan, Alan became the Senior Executive Advisor of Hawaiian Electric Company in February 2020, after serving for 5 years as the President and Chief Executive Officer of the Hawaiian Electric Company Incorporated. Alan's practiced law prior to 2005 and was involved in numerous high-profile cases involving water rights, land use, and all aspects of public utility regulation, and was recognized by his peers for his accomplishments. Service to the community has been a hallmark of Alan's career. He has been recognized by numerous professional and community organizations and for his leadership and volunteerism, especially his work to improve public education. Alan, since you kindly agreed to help us understand the state's response to the difficulties COVID-19 has imposed on Hawaii, the US and the world have been awakened to the systematic racial injustices that too many Americans face. These are issues which Hawaii faces as well, though less overtly. In your presentation and responses today, I hope that you can shed light on how the state's recovery plan will take marginalized voices into account. Thank you. With that, Alan, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Lesley. Absolutely to the last comment, and you'll see how we're approaching our path to resiliency with that in mind. It's foundational to how we view moving forward. So forgive me, I'm going to kind of walk you through not yet very public deck on how we're viewing the next phase of our recovery. As Lesley mentioned, we were in stability, trying to stabilize the trauma that that COVID-19 has imposed not only on us, but the world, but probably very, very harshly on Hawaii, who really suffered the greatest loss in employment next to Nevada, both very heavily tourist-related areas. And we went from less than 3% unemployment to over 20%, for example. Next slide, please. We now in the reopening phase, which is the second part, we're moving into recovery phase. A lot of what we're talking about today is the future, but we have to start thinking about it today. And this is not to ignore the realities of what we're facing. The hottest topic now for most in the economy is reopening our baseline economy, heavily reliant upon tourism as a large sector. So I'm not demeaning that effort, and frankly, most of my day and the very sparse Navigator team's day and volunteers is really spent on addressing that issue. But occasionally we have to start looking to the future. But I do want to assure everyone that our current focus is on reopening visitor travel and all the implications from that. So we do have to think about resiliency, because if there's any one thing that this pandemic has taught us, we've learned it before, but I think more so now, is our dependence on certain industries that are fragile, given our geographic location, needs to be rethought. We absolutely need tourism in our future as a baseline. How we reopen it can have implications on what we will be in the future. But we've talked for years about diversifying our economy. What we have to do now is really do a baseline of what that means, what are our pluses and minuses, what things about Hawaii that may have been impediments may suddenly become benefits. And we have to do that in logical order. And that discussion has to start pretty quickly. Next slide, please. So ECN stands for Economic and Community Navigator. Navigator was chosen for this new post very deliberately. We are navigating, we're not commanding, we're not coordinating per se, but we're trying to look at the near-term impacts, near-term policies, but also looking over the horizon to see what the possibilities are and to navigate to that future. So we've, since 2 months ago, we've now been in operation about 2 months. We launched the website. I invite all of you to go to Recovery Navigator at Hawaii.com, and we're constantly updating and refreshing it, but you'll find a wealth of information there. We supported the development of our reopening plan, working with HEA, HMSA, and others, the legislature and others, to really come up with what we believe to be a supportable reopening plan based upon health metrics and capacities. We've also been working on the development of sector-specific reopening materials and health guidelines. I know that can be confusing at times just because there's so many entities involved, and frankly, we ask everyone to look at their county guidelines that may be more specific, but still fall under the umbrella of general CDC and state health guidelines. We've engaged with various industry sectors. There are about 14 of them. We've held web meetings with them in order to understand their concerns and to refine the reopening scenarios. And we've conducted economic impact assessments to identify gaps in funding and the need for additional funding. I must be clear, however, the economic ECN does not have funds of its own. We can make recommendations as we see community and economic needs. We've worked very, very closely with all those involved in the state communications plans for reopening, and we're continuing to do that. Next slide, please. So you'll see the stabilization to resilience time frame, right? We were in the red zone when it was basically trying to stabilize from the trauma, and you see the impacts to everyone. Safer at home, with moderate disruption, We got through that, and now we're in Act with Care and reopening medium risk businesses, um, and but still asking everyone to comply with safe practices. And that is the key as we move towards a new normal. It will not let up. As you've seen in other areas, when there's some let up, you see a upsurge of cases, not so much that it drops them back to stability phase, but we have to be very careful. We have a very uninfected population. And so we don't have herd immunity. And for that, we have to be very protective of our fragile island and community. Next slide, please. The timeline for reopening. You can see that these are all, by the way, public. We are with Act with Care in the June timeframe, and you have seen how medium risk businesses are being reopened and moving towards higher risk businesses as we move forward. Tomorrow, our restaurants in Honolulu will reopen under their own and guidelines, and you'll see a difference in how we operate as a community. I will say again, though, that under the governor's strategies and reopening guidelines, the counties can make their own decisions within the parameters approved by the governor. Next slide, please. This is what we call the moon chart. So you can see by category how different businesses and events are either open or not open and what practices they would have to follow. Again, we're almost there. We're in the recovery phase, and we're in the Act with Care phase, moving into recovery phase. So as you can see by this, how things might start to loosen up a bit as we continue to do safe practices and have good COVID response metrics. Next, please. Okay, so this is again, generally the planning framework. Matters I've already talked about, stabilization. We went into reopening. We're in that phase. We're going into recovery, and then we'll get into resilience. And the resilience portion is what we're going to talk about mainly today, but we'll be open for questions on any of the preceding phases as well. Next, please. Okay, so the hardships I don't have to dwell on this. We all are living it. And the high unemployment will continue beyond the short term. You know, the last downturn in the economy in 2008, it took years to recover. This will take probably a little longer because it's a global downturn. And the impacts are significant. So we've been so highly successful in flattening the curve and keeping the virus in check in Hawaii, and we have to protect that as we move forward, but not continue to allow the economy to suffer. So it's the risk tolerance level that we're all going to have to be a part of undertaking and coming to a balance as to what we can and cannot accept. Next, please. So as we move forward into resilience, our thinking is, at first we were thinking of asking everyone what they wanted and what they needed. And we realized that if we did that, we would just be building each sector to be bigger than what it is now, probably based upon the same scenarios. And that is not the opportunity that's presented to us. So we're looking at fundamental changes that we can capture by what we've lived through in the last few months. You can see we all acknowledge, right, that we have an aging population, but we also have more people engaging in different activities, online shopping. Companies and employees are more amenable to distance work. People have lost trust in the ability to safely travel long distances. So whether we open up travel or not, will they return? COVID-19 has exposed a need for more robust healthcare system. We have a great healthcare system, but is it what we need moving forward if we're continually facing these impacts? Large gatherings are not likely to be allowed for a long time, sporting events, etc. And the methods and frequency of transportation have changed. Our air globally had remarkably cleaner when people stopped flying and driving, but that will not continue. But what can we learn from that in terms of how we conduct ourselves moving forward? So on the other side, you can see the impacts from these learnings, how we should move forward. New market opportunities may be available to be less dependent on tourism. Tourism will always be a mainstay of Hawaii, but how it manifests itself is open for really deep discussion. One of the examples of things that have changed on the work from home, you know, we've always talked about diversifying our economy. Now, large companies on the mainland and some small ones are saying you can work from home. Well, guess what? With great broadband connectivity and our time zone, we can have the home be Hawaii, serving markets elsewhere. And that's an opportunity for us to recapture a tax base without a lot of investment in infrastructure, for example. These are things that we have to consider as we move forward. Next slide, please. So, first of all, is review what we've done in the past and what we've learned from them. If we don't do that, we might commit the same errors from the past. So then we have to do unique competitive advantages and how can we use them? Our time zone, is it an advantage or a disadvantage in the new world? Our logistics, supply chains, same thing, right? And work from home, is that an advantage or a disadvantage to us? We want to drive change as we move forward to what we're calling cross-sector innovation pods and meetings with stakeholders across different sectors so that we have a deeper understanding of how everything is connected, especially in an island state. And then we really, really have to improve on communities engagement and communication. That is a huge need that we have to move forward with. Next, please. Next slide, please. So you go back to the next earlier. Innovation pods, new voices and silent demographics. This actually addresses what Lesley asked at the outset. We are viewing this, and I keep repeating this. This is a play with an ensemble cast with no lead actors. That's how we're approaching this. Everyone has a voice in this if we're to make it sustainable and if we're able to implement it. We can't have it done just by the usual voices around the table. So our process will be to try to reach diverse demographics across our state. But for that, I'll give you an example. For example, in terms of, most of us want diversified agriculture. Well, lo and behold, when I listened in on a presentation recently, the market for diversified ag is very heavily dependent on our tourism industry. I had never connected. It's logical. I had never connected it. We need this cross-sector discussion so that we can come up with solutions that are not siloed, but then can take advantage of the system that we developed in Hawaii. Next slide, please. So we have to make decisions to address the current needs. Right now, we have lots of needs, but we have to anticipate the needs of our future generations. And only if we do that, we'll create a stronger Hawaii. So on the right side of the slide, you'll see all the things that we consider, not only economics, but feasibility, relevance to values, sustainable solutions, looking at where our competitive edge may be, and really aligning with the global new normal, and charting where expected global growth will be. We can either accept or reject. We're not making any prejudgments on any of these, but we have to have the discussion around all of these as we move forward. Next, please. So the pathway gives you a timeline. This this extends beyond December 2020. We'll have to have these discussions. We have to do the cross innovation pods. We have to do some straw plans so that people can react to them. But we really want to start with gathering information, have a database discussion, have relevant information for people to use as we chart our future. Next, please. It'll be several years in the making. Here's an example of a cross-sector pod, and we just use health in Hawaii. That is not health systems in Hawaii. It's talking about health. So the innovation pods would bring together various sectors: technology, community leaders, government, non-sector, non-profit sectors, et cetera, so that you have a robust discussion among different areas to lead to some conclusions or recommendations. Next, please. So here are some this is not in concrete, these are samples of innovation pod sectors that could be formed, and then we can do the cross-sector discussions. Next, please. So that's the end of the slide deck, and I will say that I'm open for questions, but I've asked Governor Ige if he could spend a few minutes and leave his current meeting to join us so that he can also answer questions that you may have, and probably better than I could. So I can start by answering any questions you have, but please keep in mind that hopefully in a few minutes, the governor will also join us in this conversation. Lesley, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you, Alan. Just getting reconnected here. A number of questions on tourism, of course. I'll start with Rep. Jean Ward's question. Thank you for your presentation. The elephant in the room is still when and how we are going to open our visitor industry. Can you discuss with us pre-testing passengers 72 hours prior to arrival in Hawaii, like Alaska is doing? Thank you for all you're doing in your retirement. Mahalo, Jean Ward.
Hey, thank you, Jean. Yeah, it's a great retirement. I filled that 3 times now. So Alaska announced, 72 hours prior, take a test, present proof of it upon arrival in Alaska. If you don't have that, we'll test you, or you can go into quarantine. When our state officials reached out to Alaska, they were very skimpy on the process and terms. This has been proposed here, but we have to be very cautious about our markets and the availability of testing, as well as what compliance measures are provided, how we determine what is a valid test, the laboratory from which it comes. There is no standard right now. And also recall that whatever we impose on new visitors to Hawaii will be applicable in the United States to our returning residents. So depending on where our residents venture as we open up, the availability of testing at whose cost, and the compliance and validity of testing are all open issues. So while it on paper sounds great, and it may be, there are issues to resolve on all of those matters. And the governor just joined us, so I don't know if the governor heard my response, but he's in a better position to answer all of that. Governor, the question from Representative Jean Ward was the 72-hour prior testing before coming to Hawaii, and where are we on that?
Yeah, certainly, we are looking at, so part of the whole focus is how can we enable trans-Pacific travel again in a safe way that doesn't put our community's health at risk. I know that there's a number of different ways, and let me just briefly talk about, when we look at trans-Pacific travel, we're looking at it in 2 or 3 big categories of travel. The first is international, because with foreign travelers, we certainly have more flexibility in the requirements that we would want to see put in place. In addition to mandatory quarantine, we might be able to do things with those countries that would reduce the risk. I think most importantly, though, I think when we look at travel and trans-Pacific travel, we are focused in those communities where we see very similar or equivalent virus activity. We would want to be able to begin a transportation corridor between Hawaii and those communities that have very low incidence of COVID-19, because we believe that would allow us to bring visitors and send visitors to those locations, and the risk to our community is essentially very similar to what we see here in the island. So that's the overall goal. And in addition to that, so we're looking at international, we're looking at domestic, and looking at states that have a similar virus activity that we see today. And they might include Alaska, Oregon, Montana, Wyoming, as kind of the states that have seen similar virus activities. And then we are looking at what I'm referring to, at least internally as we're talking about it, as to kind of a safe travels kind of program. Can we develop specific targeted transportation corridors that may include testing before people arrive or testing after people arrive? And can we create a system of screening that would reduce the risk to our community and the risk to the other guests who are coming? So all of those we're running in parallel, trying to see what's the safest way for us to begin trans-Pacific visitors from coming to the islands again.
Hey, Governor, may I just add, I think that the more I've sat in on so many of your meetings with all the Department of Health and stakeholders and the very deep discussions around everything, some of the things I've learned, for example, that right now, the governor always points out that Japan, rightly so, counts Hawaii as part of the United States. And the United States has one of the worst records right now in terms of COVID response. And therefore, there's a ban on travel to Hawaii as a result of that. What the governor is trying to look at is a differentiation, because Hawaii, among all the states, has the best response. So these are things that government to government kinds of discussions are very much needed, and the governor is already undergoing all of those discussions. So that's number one. Number two, as I look at some of the comments coming through on chat, and there's a strong feeling that we better do it right, because we can't afford to close down again. And that is certainly everything I hear from the governor is of paramount importance. What we've been working on in the government, what I'm learning, is improving to an extent our contact tracing abilities, our testing abilities. In just the last 2 months, we used to be able to only do, what was it, Governor, 200 tests a day?
Yes,
and now
250.
Now we're up to 5,000. That's improved on-site laboratory, on-site technology, on-site supplies. It might get better, but it's still only 5,000. And we used to welcome, 30,000 visitors a day. So we have to be realistic on how we use our relatively scarce resources. Certainly ample resources if we use them wisely to control influx. So that's number one. There's been a huge increase in contact tracing abilities using technology as well as people. And Governor, you might want to talk about the new number of contact tracers that are going to be in place by, I think, mid this month or July, for example.
Certainly we do have, and we understand that contact tracing is an essential part of the public health response. What you might not know is Hawaii is probably the only state that maintained an aggressive contact tracing program for the entire duration of this pandemic. most states were not prepared and did not have people in place that would be able to, once we identify someone who is COVID positive, be able to talk with them and identify other people that they may have exposed so that we can reach out and offer tests and other services to help contain the virus spread. So we do have a robust program, and we have a plan to expand within the Department of Health. Potentially, we have about 35 people working as contact tracers as we speak. They do have a plan to increase to as many as 80 if necessary. And then you may have seen the announcement in the media about taking contact tracing to the community colleges so that we would be able to train up to 500 additional contact tracers in the next 4 weeks. So that would really give us the capacity and ability to be able to respond once we begin to bring trans-Pacific travelers back.
Yeah, we could go on. We could go on for hours, but we'll stop here because I know people have other questions.
Yeah.
Thank you for that very in-depth look. I think that covered quite a few of our tourism questions. Let me see if there are others here to get to. We'll take a question from another area. In reassessing recovery, can you speak to demographic groups who may be more at risk than the general population as we begin to reopen, and how are we protecting those groups?
Well, Governor, if you let me go first. We're very cognizant of Aloha United Way's ALICE study, and Peter Ho at Bank of Hawaii is a big proponent of watching out for those, as are other groups. And we recognize that a large percentage of our families in Hawaii, while working, still don't have sufficient assets to really have a full lifestyle. And so that voice has to be heard, and we have to find ways that everyone has their share of whatever the pie is going to be. So if we're going to grow the pie, then everyone needs to have a proportionate share. And that's very, very critical as we look for a sustainable economy. I'll just say that. As we move forward, I know Kavika Riley is on. He's on the board of Hawaii Institute for Public Affairs, but he's also working the Queen Liliuokalani Trust in community development. And they've already volunteered, for example, to do outreach for the recovery team for the communities they serve and use their processes to reach other communities as well. I met with another community group yesterday. So there are these various groups that can reach different areas of the state, and we need all of them to bring all voices to the table. Governor Ige, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Yeah, no, I would, Lesley, I would just add, that has been the focus. We are looking at community groups who already serve these minority and underserved communities as the best conduit. They are already connected to many in the community, and we're working with them so that we can cover the broadest base of, hearing and listening to the needs, and then trying to work through these organizations to get aid and assistance back to those most in need.
Thank you for that. Another question in terms of assessing recovery, you spoke about some of the considerations and difficulties in reopening. Other states and countries have been able to decide on policies and implement them quicker than Hawaii. What are some of the other obstacles to speeding up the government's response, and how can these be overcome?
I would just want to say this, Lesley, before, there has been lots of comments about other locations and countries reopening faster than Hawaii, but when I actually looked at the information, they may have announced plans, but they're really not reopened. So I just really want to remind people, there's a couple things that make our situation here more challenging than it might be otherwise. I did talk about the fact that for international travel, we do have more control over that because as foreign travelers, we can overlay and require different requirements because they are not from the US. And so we are looking at the complicating part is that we're just the state of Hawaii. We're not the United States of America. And so in discussing and hoping to work through agreements, as governor of the state of Hawaii, I am talking to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Japan and Korea and New Zealand and Australia, and having to say and ask them to treat the state of Hawaii differently than the rest of the country. And we are saddled and burdened with the poor performance in terms of COVID response of the entire country. And that does make it more complicated. So, I think it's the fact that we are part of the US and at the same time, we want to be able to see different arrangements with international partners. I think that is challenging, but I think the best opportunity for us to move forward.
Thank you. And moving on to some virus-specific questions, how is the probability of the virus being more widespread in Hawaii than the official count? And if so, how widespread is that?
Yeah, I feel very comfortable, Lesley, that that it's not significantly higher than what we see. The actual positive test is coming back at less than 2%. I think when I looked at the statistics, 1.6 or 1.7% of those tested are positive. Two things lead me to have confidence that that's realistic, that the prevalence of the virus is really low in Hawaii. The first is that Hawaii does have a sentinel testing system, and we are overlaying on the influenza assessment system, and we are taking samples from those who are symptomatic, but they've tested negative for all of the known variants of flu. And so we are taking those samples and testing them. And we still see a very, very low incidence, less than a few percentage points of those samples that come back positive. So we know that there isn't a whole lot of virus circulating. And you may have read that Hawaii Pacific Pacific Health had done their own assessment using an antibody test to test all employees who volunteered to be tested. And the number of employees that actually came back with the antibodies caused by COVID-19 was a very, very small percentage of the entire workforce at Hawaii Pacific Health. So, just looking at those factors, I do believe that what we see, the less than 2% positive rate, is probably indicative of the general prevalence of COVID-19 in our community.
Thank you, Governor. And in regards to the virus, particularly as it applies to reopening the economy, has a second wave been factored into the scenarios?
We definitely are prepared for a second wave. I think Alan has talked about the increased testing capacity and contact tracing, which we believe is just fundamental to respond. The other point that I think sometimes gets missed is, the performance of our healthcare system has really been amongst the tops in the country. When you just look at the percent of cases that actually require hospitalization, the state of Hawaii is at about 12%. And nationally, the rate of hospitalizations have exceeded 25% or more. And I tell people that the reason our rate of needing hospitalization is lower than the country national average is because people have gotten and had access to healthcare. Hawaii has one of the highest percentage of people covered with health insurance. And I think people are used to when they feel sick, they go to the doctors, and we have been able to intervene and get care much earlier in the disease progression, which allows us to get much better health outcomes. So I do think for a number of reasons, that's why we're performing so well.
Thank you. And a lot of questions coming through, people wanting us to get back to talking about the economy, so we'll do that. Specifically, are there specific projects that are being targeted to help boost the economy, such as TMT or expediting the new stadium?
Certainly we are looking at a construction incentive. We've surveyed all of the state agencies looking for shovel-ready projects. Working with the legislature for a stimulus package of, 500 million or more of projects that we feel are priority projects to begin with. So, it gives us the opportunity to make investments in infrastructure. And then most importantly, that it's shovel-ready. So plans, designs, those kinds of activities have already been initiated. And we can get those projects into the economy very, very soon. The stadium obviously is one of those projects that is significant just because of the cost of the stadium. We continue to move that forward, looking at a public-private partnership, and then being innovative in how we do the project, doing design build so that we can get the project started much, much quicker. And then on the topic of TMT, we continue, I continue to talk with the board of the TMT. They are in the process of making a determination about how they would like to proceed with that project. I've been very active in meeting with the National Science Foundation, the Association of Universities in research that are involved with astronomy, and a number of other institutions to really continue to let them know that the project is a high priority for the state of Hawaii, and that we are committed to seeing it be successful in our community.
Thank you. And in considering future economic development initiatives, can you speak more to the historical analysis process of past economic development initiatives? Who is conducting this and what is being analyzed?
So we're looking at all past studies. Last real state plan, Governor, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but Governor Ige back that far back did the last huge planning exercise, which led to a lot of the policies we have in place now and the agencies we have in place now. Since then, there have been fits and starts on planning, the 2050, Hawaii 2050, the infrastructure plans. What I don't want to do is do all of this just to have another plan sit on the shelf and without an implementation strategy and without some backing of all the key components to say, let's make this happen. So that's why the process is important. We have to deal with facts. So somebody raised TMT. In this whole COVID-19 pandemic, if anything is clear to most of us, 99.99999% of us, is that science matters, right? What is our role in science in Hawaii? But we also know that our culture really matters. What sustains us through things like this is our culture and our host culture. How do we bring all of this together to come up with a compromise or a solution? I'm not suggesting that this is our purpose, but we can have a platform for these discussions as we move forward.
Thank you. And in looking at some of the practical realities of not being open, GET taxes are 50% of our budget and 25% of our revenue comes from withholding taxes. So when businesses are not open and people aren't working, we're going to die in the water unless we project when we cannot take on any more debt without opening our economy. When do you project we will run out of money or run out of credit?
Thanks, Lesley, for that question. We definitely are looking at a couple things. The Treasury has made available access to a municipal loan program that is not normally available to us, and the terms are very attractive. The rate at which they will assess us to take a loan is very low, and then the interest rate is low. So we are looking at, and based on our expenditure ceiling, we believe that the maximum we could borrow is something like $2.4 billion. The challenge is that the term is 3 years. And so certainly, even though we could borrow a whole lot of money, we would have to pay it back in 3 years. And so, the economic benefit of taking out that loan just has to be balanced against, the notion that we have to pay it back in such a short period of time. We are also looking at other avenues. We were in the process of issuing a bond float in April, and then COVID happened and the bond market collapsed. We are preparing to re-enter the bond market in June, July, August kind of time frame, because we do know and we do see that the interest rates are really low. And as we talked about earlier, we do see a construction program to boost the economy if the bond market stabilize and reopen. So all of those things are being balanced as we move forward with economic recovery. In addition to that, I am meeting and talking with all the nation's governors on a weekly basis, and some aid from the Congress to support states in replacing lost revenue and allowing us to continue to provide critical services and avoiding layoffs and furloughs, I think is top priority for all of the 50 nation's governors. We argue and we inform the Congress that if the states cannot continue to function and provide services that are critical, then the entire recovery will be set back tremendously.
And on that same note, a question regarding the rainy day fund. How come we aren't using the rainy day fund?
We do have access to the rainy day fund, and we will use it. That does require an appropriation from the legislature. So that is an option, and we are incorporating it into our financial plan. Lesley, I have for the past 5 years been meeting with and presenting to the ratings agencies as we've floated bonds, and I've really worked very hard to get a higher rating, and we finally were able to get an improved rating from all 3 rating agencies. And the emergency reserve fund is one of those things that they look at. So I think all of these things are being balanced. We definitely know that we will be drawing on the rainy day fund during this economic downturn. We are weighing and balancing the cost of the Treasury loan, the rainy day fund. We can have access to the hurricane relief fund as we have in the past. So we're looking at all of these options in developing a financial plan that really serves the state and the community in the best way.
Thank you. And looking at some diversification, with our heavy reliance on tourism and the current unemployment numbers, when we talk about diversification of the economy, which industries do you think are ready or near ready for growth, such as tech, ag, or green industries?
I think tech, ag, and green industries, Lesley, are really at the top of the list. I think in things that industries that are aligned with our overall policies and priorities, in addition to the fact that they can create high quality jobs. I think one of the, a couple lessons learned from this current pandemic is, everyone has accelerated the use of technology. I could not have imagined, and I know that I've spoken with the Hawaii Economic Association on a number of occasions. I would never have thought that I'd be doing a webinar, today with so many of your members and other guests joining us online. So, I'm inspired by the notion that even though people don't view themselves as being technology literate, everyone has figured it out and really embraced the technology. And it does demonstrate that many businesses and many activities can be done anywhere in the world, which allows all of us to be expansive in our thinking and think about what markets and opportunities are out there for the things that you do in your normal business cycle. So I do think that that's a wake-up call for all of us. Really allows us to think about seeking not only customers here in the islands, but what other markets can there be for your goods and services that you produce. Clearly, agriculture and the opportunity to provide more of the food that we eat. We did see what a big driver of restaurants is for our community. Just when you shut them all down, you realize how much they in agricultural products they consume, and when the market is gone, what a dramatic impact they have on our farmers. So I still am committed to expanding local agriculture. I want to get to the point that potentially 100% of what we eat is grown here, and definitely accelerating what that opportunity would be. And the green energy, we saw for the first time what can actually happen if you stop people from driving. All across the country and around the world, we saw that we can actually reduce greenhouse gases dramatically just by people stop driving. And so I think it's a reminder and a reaffirmation that our primary goals that we've accepted as a community really can provide a foundation of how we can diversify our economy moving forward.
Can I add just a little bit to that? Just because of how we approach the planning process, it has to be systematic. So when we talk about agriculture, we also have to talk about access to markets and the supply chain. So, for example, there are things that we're learning. We have specialty crops grown here that will not be allowed into California due to pest insect infiltration. So we have to fly those products to New York, for example, for access to that market. We have to look at airlift capacity for incoming visitors as an opportunity for outbound cargo capacity. A few years back, we had a homegrown fresh pineapple that constituted one of the largest cargoes outbound from Hawaii. We don't really have that anymore. So we have to look at the whole chain. If I'm talking to economists, right, we have to look at the whole supply chain and the demand chain to fashion an industry that's sustainable and not just merely looking at Hawaii as a market. Hawaii has to be an important part of it, but to really expand its economic base, we have to look at other markets and access. So I'll just offer that as well. And that's why we want data out there to drive some of the discussions, and not just wishes.
Thank you. And we have really only 1 minute left, but we'll squeeze in a few questions. We have a few questions regarding nonprofits and real estate that I'd like to get to. Broadly, within the nonprofit sector, how do you see mission or sector-oriented groups or other nonprofits included in the innovation pods, particularly those that didn't have access to PPP funding and supporting those organizations?
So if you, I went through the slides very quickly, but the nonprofits were clearly a part of the health pod. I think the nonprofits are going to be a part of many pods. They are our safety net. They're providing the services that everybody needs. And frankly, they have to be part of the conversation across all of the economic discussions.
Okay, and then
Let's just a quick addition. You know, they should have been available like any other business to get access to PPP. So, you know, if there's a specific reason why they weren't, I'd be happy to hear it from you offline. If you can let me know which nonprofits specifically were not able to get assistance.
Let me just say, Governor, the DBED people who are working on this did assist many nonprofits to get access. And the banks, of course, our local banks did a tremendous job in getting access. But yeah, we'd love to hear what else could be done, as would our congressional delegation.
Thank you. And just one more question here on real estate. What do you see as the impact on the real estate market now and in the foreseeable future? And could real estate be an economic driver?
It's a big part of our economy. But when we talk about infrastructure, we're also talking about the real estate attached to it. And yes, absolutely, it's a big part of our economy now. It's probably going to be a big part of it moving forward. One of the good things about our shutdown was that construction was an essential services. So one of the things that has kept part of the economy going has been the construction projects. And real estate is absolutely a big part of our economy. And we have to be looking, I think, this is not the, I haven't talked to the governor about this, so I'm just going out on a limb. We have to be looking at all of our islands and what communities want and in terms of development and where they can play in the whole system of our state's economy. Real estate is a big part of that. And it's not only the real estate that we see high-end real estate, we need more affordable housing. We need access to affordable housing for workforce, et cetera, et cetera. So yes, real estate, absolutely.
Yeah, and I would just add, Lesley, real quickly, you know, I do think that there has been a pause in the industry just because of the social distancing requirements and really the stay-at-home orders. But just in my conversations with many in the industry, they do feel like, you know, although there has been a pause, that they see activity picking up pretty quickly. So, you know, we certainly would be open to hear and listen if that does not turn out to be the case.
Thank you. And we are a couple minutes over. We want to be cognizant of everybody's time today. So we are going to end there. I want to thank everybody for joining us and for your continued support as we navigate this new landscape in providing economic education online. We hope that what you learned today has been valuable. Please take some time to provide your thoughts on this event via the feedback form, which can be accessed at tinyurl.com/HEA June feedback form. It shouldn't take you more than 5 to 10 minutes to complete, and that's the link here on your screen. If you registered, you will receive the link by email. You'll also receive the slides and a recording of the event once those are available. Just a reminder, we are an all-volunteer board. Please be patient. You'll receive those materials next week. If you haven't yet registered to get those materials, you can do so until the end of the day. Registration will close after today, so please don't wait. Thank you, Alan and Governor Ige, for providing such great information, and to our very broad audience, and our HEA Board Director, Carly Liddell, and HEA intern, Sierra Brewer, who have been an enormous support behind the scenes, ensuring a smooth event. Thanks also to Board Director Paul Migliorato, who left no stone unturned in getting our promotional information out, and to our Board Director, Reen Kamita, for organizing and coordinating the event with our speaker. Thanks to our members, our board, and our returning attendees. And thank you also to those attendees for joining us for the first time. We hope that you'll consider regular attendance at our monthly events. And as mentioned, July 2nd, we'll hear from Mark Mubuishi, MD, President and CEO of HMSA. This event will also be a webinar. Details for that will follow. We strive to make our events relevant and beneficial to Hawaii's diverse business community by tackling topics that are pertinent and breaking them down to make them accessible to a broad audience. We hope that you found this to be the case, and we look forward to your feedback. We'll keep you posted on our July event. Thank you for your time and attention today. It is my sincere hope that you are a steward of aloha, especially for the marginalized voices in our community and beyond. We all need to breathe. Aloha.
Interesting. I just saw lots of comments. I don't know if they're gonna try and